Shalom, everybody, and welcome to the Yishai Fleisher Show, broadcasting live from Judea to the world. You're a part of it wherever you are. Shalom, and welcome to the Land of Israel Network. And shalom, and welcome to the Corona period, where we're still at the Corona period, but we're here in Israel. We're starting to really come out of it, and it feels like budding of trees, the budding of plants. It's like we're coming back out of our hibernation. And I just want to send you blessings for health and healing wherever you are around the world. We have a fabulous show for you today. On the show today, we have Rabbi Mike Feuer for a great discussion, both about the politics that are going on and the narrative war and Rashida Tlaib's, amazing photo with the dog dressed as in the flag of the United States. We're going to discuss that in depth, and then a Torah portion, two Torah portions that are so important, which is Behar-Bechukotai. And I did that interview with Rabbi Mike live on Facebook and on my YouTube channel. So check those out, at Yishai Fleisher. It's easy to connect there. And then after we finished with Rabbi Mike Feuer, which was great, we have with us Dr. Sherry Sufi from Western Australia, and we'll be talking about is Israel a European colonial enterprise or not, and how to defeat that argument. So those are two very interesting discussions that we had. They both took place actually live on Facebook, and now it turns into the podcast. And enjoy the show. I don't want to lengthen it anymore because it's already a long show. It's almost 2 hours altogether. But we like to give you content to make sure that all those dishes are washed and all those joggings are done. So lots of blessings from the land of blessings. Here's Rabbi Mike Feuer with Parshat Behar-Bechukotai and issues of the day. Here we go. All right, everybody, shalom, and welcome to the Yishai Fleisher Show here on my Facebook page and on my YouTube as well, and on the Land of Israel Network on our podcast there. I've got a picture up of Rashida Tlaib and a dog. We'll talk about that just in a second when we have Rabbi Mike Feuer join us on the program today. Before I do, I have to apologize for my long hair. I want to explain just for a second. Today is Lad Be'omer, right? The 34th day of the Omer. And according to both Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, you could already get a haircut today. And according to Ashkenazim, you could get a haircut on Lag Be'omer, but I did not get a haircut yesterday on Lag Be'omer. And that is because a Jew, a soldier, was killed yesterday. One could even say maybe murdered, or maybe you can't say that because it was in a line of battle, but with terrorists. So I don't know if it was a murder, but it was definitely a death. And so yesterday, this amazing soldier, his name is, and I have a way of remembering his name, Amit. Amit means friend or colleague. And Ben Yigal is son of he who will redeem, son of the Redeemer. And so that he's one of us, Amit, that he's just like us, and he was in Sayid Golani, in the elite force of Golani. But so he's just one of us. He's like an awesome Israeli fighting for the rights of Jewish people in the land of Israel. And then Ben Yigal is that he's the son of kind of a redemption that should come, that's waiting to come, but was either stymied yesterday by this murder somewhat, or not, or maybe there was something very special in his kind of death yesterday that's somehow going to help us come to a better consciousness. Either way, it hurt my Lag BaOmer happiness. You're supposed to be happy on Lag BaOmer. I heard it a little bit during the daytime, so I decided I can't, even though I wanted to get a haircut yesterday, and I'm legally allowed to get a haircut according to Jewish Ashkenazi law, even on Lag BaOmer. I just couldn't do it while he was not yet buried. So that's what happened yesterday. So that's my apology. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I'm also looking forward to hearing from Rabbi Mike Feuer, who is with us right now. Rabbi Mike, welcome to the show.
Hi, Yishai. It's good to see you.
Oh, hold on one second. Let me change where the audio is coming in. I'm sorry about that. I forgot that I have to switch it into different headphones. Okay, here we go. Good.
You hear me now?
Yeah, you sound awesome and great. Thank you very much for joining me today. That. Rabbi Mike Feuer is a regular on the show, and he is also the host and creator of his own show called The Jewish Story, and it's found at jewishstory.co. And all his other stuff is at facebook.com/Rav Mike. And Rav Mike, we have an awesome awesome stuff to discuss today.
It's
Awesome
big.
stuff.
Double parsha. The world
Double
is
parsha.
once again
Right.
coming to a boil. So yeah.
Right.
What
And we're
could be
finishing
bad?
off. We're finishing off the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, with a rage and fury. So I put up a banner here. It says we're going to study Parshot Behar-Bechukotai. I wrote it in Hebrew on purpose, even though a lot of our audience is English speaking. I just thought to myself, everybody's got to learn to read Hebrew a little bit. So Parshot are the Torah portions, plural. Behar-Bechukotai. Before we get to it, I want to talk to you about something that I found to be quite amazing, which was a photo that was put up by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. 1 second, what did I do? There it is. There's the picture itself. Let's just see it. All right, let's take off the Behar-Bechukotai sign. This is an incredible photo that she posted up, and she writes, "Happy World Kafia Day." Kafia is the traditional Arab scarf type thing or headdress, right? And she's wearing it like a scarf now. "It is a day to raise awareness of the Palestinian struggle, the Nakba Day, and to celebrate the beautiful Palestinian culture at Kafia Day." Now, the picture itself is like the cover of Rolling Stone type thing, right? It's like a totally incredible photo. And I think that some people, even my own wife, said to me, who's pretty astute on these things, says to me that she didn't catch what I was pointing out to her, which is this, in my opinion, what this picture means. It's all about imagery here, and the imagery is Islam is dominating the poodle or pug United States, and so you got two images on the image. The dog is obviously some people think it's ugly, other people think it's cute. I happen to think it's
either
cute.
way, it's subservient.
Right, exactly. Exactly right. That's right. It's subservient, and it's like it's subservient, and it's also, even its cuteness is a type of pathetic cuteness. It's not like a strong cuteness. It's a silly, kind of dog.
Goofy dog. It's a
goofy dog. That's right. He's a goofy dog, not Goofy, who's not exactly a dog, but Goofy, a goofy dog.
Not go there.
And it's so obvious now. The trick of the picture is her facial expression, that it's like really like she's having fun with it. Right. Everything is cool. Everything is funny. Everything is like lively. But that is not the meaning of the picture. That is a way to get into people's minds that, like, here's the U.S. is going to be dominated by Islam, and the words are, and don't forget, like, that's one set of images, and then the words are a completely different set, which is Palestine and the struggle, not mentioning Israel, and the beauty of Palestinian culture, as opposed to some other thing that's not mentioned. And I just thought to myself, wow, this is one heck of an awesome piece of propaganda.
It is certainly well put together. You left out a critical piece that people may be unaware of, which is that the dog, of course, is an archetypical impure animal in Islamic culture, right? It's not an acceptable comparison, right? It's for a Muslim to be compared to a dog is second only probably to the pig, right? So dressing up America as the sort of like the cute but ugly, goofy little dog in the arms. Yeah, I hear it. I mean, without getting into the parshanut, into the analysis of the picture, I think the important piece here is a question that I've had for a long time, which is that who's driving this bus? Who is it that is directing this type of visual narrative warfare? Who has sort of put together this sort of very powerful set of freshman congresswomen who have a certain look, they have a certain style, they've captured the imagination of the American people on issues, by the way, which don't necessarily have to do with, as you're pointing out, this sort of struggle between Islam and the West, since, of course, much of the West is still unwilling to recognize that struggle's going on, right? Let's not forget that most, I think, Americans, I can't speak for the Europeans, but most Americans, I think, you would be labeled as a crazy conspiratist alt-writer if you start talking about sort of like a struggle of civilizations between Islam and the West. Even though anybody who knows anything about history knows that struggle's been going on for, I don't know, 1,200 years.
Right.
And it's had,
right,
ebbs and flows, but
right, has ebbs and flows, and to the point that also on the Western, let's say Christendom, they also had their imagery. Famously, the croissant. The croissant is this food that was created in, I think it was in Vienna, when the West, when the Muslim incursion was stopped in Vienna. So they created this treat called the croissant, which is supposed to represent the crescent.
They're eating the crescent.
Right. I eat you. I eat you. I beat you.
Am I gonna have to Snopes you on that one? Or are you sure it's true?
Snope away. And I, by the way, recommend everybody snopes away and checks things out, and also comments. Please comment on both any feed that you find right now. It really helps us get the show going. So love to hear from you. Yeah, I was moved by the depth of that picture, and I think that it signals something. The other thing I want to say about that picture is that I think that we underestimate this other war that's happening right now in the world, this cultural, social media war, and the people who understand that it's a war and are fighting it like a war are moving ahead. They are able to get more market share. Market share just means more share in the minds of people, especially young people.
Which translates to resource, political power, economic influence. It's not just sort of, attention, right? It's not as my kids say, a battle for Sumi, right? It's for Sumit Lev, right? That's me, right? No. There are direct, measurable effects of these things in the real world, as we call it.
Absolutely. In a place like Hebron, where I work, we see these young people that are affected by this way of thinking come in and be actual active combatants of one kind or another against Jewish presence in Hebron, and they are moved by the Rashid Tlaib language and verbiage. And she's the Islamic, and she does it so well. She is the Muslim within that crew. She is the she's the Palestine one.
I would say she's the Arab nationalist. It's right. Actually Ilan Omar that's the Muslim.
Right, Ilan Omar is the Muslim, but she seems to right. Okay, good. I like what you're saying. So
she's the Arab nationalist,
right?
Okay, and I think it's important to understand that because there's sort of like something for everyone, right? Like the notice what that whole thing is about is that the celebrating the beautiful Palestinian culture. It doesn't say anything about Islam there, right? Nakba Day, the Palestinian struggle. That's an appeal at a very deep level, at a core level of American culture, lies that Wilsonian concept that national self-determination is a sort of an intrinsic right. It's a moral obligation on the United States to create a world in which peoples have this ability for national self-determination. And I think that it's a very important distinction. And so therefore she's not speaking to those for whom the head covering and it might appear medieval, or it might, sort of religion in general has been debunked. No, this is a free people struggling nobly, et cetera, right? Now, what exactly the Nakba is and who would be responsible for the events surrounding our attempt to reestablish ourselves as a people in our land. No. That we don't want to talk about that.
let's just speak it out so that people understand. The word Nakba means catastrophe.
And it was. Reference.
Well,
no, it was. No. It was a catastrophe for them. Why it was a catastrophe,
right?
And did it have to be? And
right.
who
and it wasn't
is responsible? It is. Right, no, it continues to be. Now it's an industry. Like I saw someone make the comment that the millions of ethnic Germans that were removed from their homes in the wake of World War II, with the sense that after the Nazi expansion, that there needed to be a little bit of like separation and cooling off period between German speakers and everybody else in Europe. They don't have a Nakba Day. Haven't created a national culture out of refusing to accept responsibility for the past, and as substituting for that a refusal to move forward into the future, right? Even we as a people who certainly mourn our past and are very attached to it, that's only a springboard for building the future, right? So what this sort of beautiful culture that she's offering and celebrating is, I'm not really sure.
Well, she's saying it's a type of Tisha B'Av. It's like we were destroyed, but we will now build our Palestine instead of Israel. We will struggle and we will beat Israel. And
but you know what the difference is, Yishai?
It's a powerful narrative.
But you want to know what the Gilui Milza, what the point of exposure is that on Tisha B'Av we go into our private spaces and mourn. We don't try to get the world on board with Tisha B'Av. We never tried to get the world on board with Tisha B'Av because we understand who's responsible for the destruction of the temple, the first and the second. Ourselves.
Right.
It's true. God sent the Babylonians. God sent the Romans. But in the end of the day, because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. And that very core stance of taking responsibility for our own past is what has given us a beautiful future, a present right now. And God willing, the future will only be more grand. Whereas to create a culture which wants to convince the world that something was done to you, and that the world, therefore, is somehow responsible to rectify what was done to you, is to elevate victimhood to the status of sanctity. And that's why you have to create these memes to draw people in.
But that's a very popular modality right now, the outrage modality, where you're like, I have been wronged, or this person's a wronger, and we're going to out them, and the person who's the outer of outrage or the outer of the bad guy's actions is valued in social media, is valued today.
As we've spoken about this. This is what is left of morality in the postmodern world. Because without some sort of narrative which allows you to decide what is right and wrong, good and bad in the world, without getting into where you get it from, it doesn't even have to be some divine narrative. That's not my point. But without some sense of continuity and standard of judgment, all you're left with is the discourse of power, as Foucault will tell you, one of the founding thinkers of the postmodernist world. And in that, we've spoken about it so many times, there are only victims and perpetrators. So therefore, the more a victim you are, the more righteous you are. And that's in the expression of outrage on behalf of the victim is the way in which you can what's called signal your virtue, right? Whereas we live in a world of heroism. We understand that actually, no, there are more than victims and perpetrators. There are heroes.
Right.
And a hero uses force and power in service of what's good and right, even though, by the way, there are no perfect heroes. Our tradition is not a tradition of perfect heroes. Everyone from Avram to Moshe to David to you name it. Right? Everyone messes up. Everyone reaches the limits of power. Everyone is a gray character on some level because we're real people. Right? It's not mythos.
Right. Right. And speaking of heroes, again, today's show is dedicated to Amit Ben Yigal, who was obviously a hero. And the story of his heroism, by the way, is that he was moved by his trip to Poland.
Yes.
He took a March of the Living trip, and he was very moved by the story. And he came back embracing nationalism, Jewish nationalism, in the sense of just what you were saying right now, which is there's an element of defense, like never again, but then taking that and moving it towards let's build something. Yes, let's build defense, but let's also build an awesome country.
Right, as a means to an end. If you're not willing to defend. Right, I saw a great quote by John Stuart Mill. Maybe I can pull it up here for myself real quick. Yeah, here it is. I used it yesterday in my podcast. He says, "War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feeling, which thinks that nothing is worth war, is much worse." Right? The sense that, oh no, war is the worst thing. Well, nothing is worth war. Well, what that does is it creates a world in which evil flourishes, right? And I think that Amit Ben Yigal is a great example because I promise you, as much as a hero as he is, if we went through his life and started examining things, he's not perfect. And when his father Shalom Damizeh was weeping over his grave and saying that he lost everything, nowhere in his mind does his father think he was perfect, because you don't need to be perfect to be a hero. All you need to do is, like you said, is to catch fire with an idea which is larger than you, and be moser nefesh, be willing to give of yourself in order to make it real in the world.
This young man, Amit, also joined not just a regular army unit, but the kind of one of the most famous of the elite units called Sayid Golani. Sayid Golani has a kind of tradition of being just considers itself one of the top of the elite units. And at the same time, it's like a type of elite unit that's used, They use them a lot. They don't just train a lot. They're
yeah,
out there.
It's very active. Yeah.
Right. They're the active folks, and he was in the field, and suddenly blocks got thrown at him. Now in this town next to Jenin, that they were throwing these blocks, and they were trying to arrest some of the perpetrators. There's really been, that whole town has been given to an anti-Israel atmosphere altogether. There's videos of just the amount of Molotov cocktails and other things that are being thrown at them. And we see also now in some of the polls that have been taken in a recent article that I saw about East Jerusalem Arabs, that they less and less identify with Israel and more identify with Palestinianism. And I think the answer is very, very clear to me. When you don't demand a kind of loyalty, when you don't also inculcate your culture and your story and your narrative in people who are in your land, but not necessarily, Jewish or would naturally identify with Zionism and Israeliness. But if you don't demand that and you don't teach that, and you allow a whole anti-narrative to be taught in those places, in those schools, including in East Jerusalem, you start to lose control of the culture. You start to lose control of the culture, and then you really create a whole class that wants to undermine your rule and wants to rebel against you. And you just haven't done the work of being a sovereign,
It's for sure true. There's also the work of being a sovereign, of owning the responsibility for physical life. Like that, because I'll give you like the flip side example. There's gotten a lot of press in the current COVID crisis has been generated around the fact that a significant percentage of the doctors, nurses, people working in pharmacies, etc., that are on the front lines of this crisis here in our country are Israeli Arabs, right? And have a complicated. Listen, I don't envy the Israeli Arabs at all. I would only envy them if I was an Arab that lived in any other Arab country. But,
right.
But exactly. I don't envy them because it's not simple. It's not simple. We haven't been perfect. There's a lot of bad blood. Fine. But why is it that there is a growing identification amongst Israeli Arabs with the project here? If not with the project, at least with the reality. Because they're doctors, nurses, and pharmacists. Meaning, not only have we sort of communicated to them that this project is a positive thing, we've shown it in reality. There is a missing link that we're ashamed of, or we're afraid of, that we're not willing to draw, which is to say explicitly, the reason we're able to do this is because we're the Jewish people. The reason we're able to create a culture in which, despite the wars, despite the 100-year war which has existed between our people and your people, we're still struggling and succeeding in building a society where you can rise to the highest levels.
Absolutely.
And it's really only because we're Jewish people.
But you gotta have an embrace on the one hand, and on the other hand, the push back, and those things work together so well. And if you don't allow yourself, you say not everybody's going to become a doctor or a lawyer.
No.
But you allow that class to rise up, great. But you also got to push back on something that, by the way, gives a lot of jihadism, gives a lot of meaning to people who don't have the wherewithal for one reason or another to rise up in society. It gives them purpose. It gives people purpose. It's a fight. There's a fun element to it. You're going to fight. You're going to struggle. You're going to create your thing.
Depth of identity, which is so lacking in so much of the world today. That sense of struggle. It's a redemptive movement in its own way. Right. And don't miss the power of that. But I would say that you're not saying anything other than what I said. You're just showing a different face of it. Meaning the fact that we're the Jewish people means that we have to stay the Jewish people in order to provide that, which means if there are elements within our society that say, no, this can't be a Jewish state, we say to them, you're wrong. First of all, you should know on the face of it, you're a fool, because it's the fact that we're Jewish people and this is a Jewish state that has provided the life that you're enjoying. And second of all, you're wrong, because we're going to fight that battle no matter what, whether you agree with me or not.
Right. And you're not going to win. That actually brings me to another thing. There's a lot being said these days about the bias in the New York Times. There was a New York Times article that had a title. I wish I would have prepared it before the show, but the title went something like this: like Israeli laboratory that
the military labs,
military lab that specialized in killing is now working on the coronavirus. And a lot of people were very upset about that. But I said to myself, and I said to people, I don't think you're thinking about this right. Israel being tough, or what I have found no better word, sadly, than badass. Okay, that imagery does not bother me so much. Let people be afraid a little bit. Let people be like, whoa, that's a tough state. Like I personally, my take is I wouldn't immediately try to like erase that image. Good. We're scary, and you're gonna have to watch out. I call this imagery. I have come up with a word for it. Actually, it's called fauda. It's fauda,
which is very popular.
Which is the best thing in Israeli hasbara in the last 30 years. Nothing has been more powerful. Yes, at least a few episodes to understand what it's about. Okay, it's because it's such a brand of what Israel is, and it's become an amazing brand ambassador to what Israel is. And the bottom line message of fauda is: don't mess. Terrorists have families. Terrorists are nice. They have loves. They have children. They have the whole thing. And if you come with us, we're going to destroy you. That's the simple.
I hear it. At the same time, I think that the insidious element of that type of headline, because I saw it as well,
right? Like a scary bad Jew, like a blood, like an old classic.
Not even that. Is that bottom line? Jews don't have a right to exist. We don't have a right to defend ourselves because the military industry's purpose is not killing. The military's industry purpose is keeping the state of Israel alive. It's true that we do that through killing. It is a rough neighborhood, but its purpose, if its purpose was killing, truth is there would be a lot less war in this region.
Right.
We unleashed the Israeli army on everyone. If we actually did the fauda model you're talking about, we just unleashed the wrath. But like who in this region, even Iran, I think in the end of the day, we would bust a hole in them.
Yeah, you know. Sure. If we went full out, it'll be over in a week.
That's what I'm saying is that, and so therefore, in that headline is in the end of the day, in the New York Times, from the coverage of the Holocaust all the way to today, has embodied this unfortunate aspect of the Jewish consciousness. Remember, the Jewish consciousness is what they're is that Jews only have a right to exist as victims.
Right.
When we're victims, then we have a moral clarity and a moral rectitude, and we're allowed to exist. But as people who do the messy business of wielding power in order to not just defend ourselves, but to create our vision of the world, no, that we don't do. That's going to do that.
Speaking of victims, speaking of Jews as victims, there's a new Jewish class of victims.
Yeah.
What's that?
Take your time period. Yeah. Anyway.
But there's a new one right now, it turns out. And that is a weird new class of victim, which is American Jewry, victim to the coronavirus, turning to Israel and saying, you're not helping enough.
Yeah, I've seen a little of that.
I've seen a little bit of that, and it's been oddly surprising. It's been, well, let's just say again what I said last week, which and I remind that my mom said this to me. She's like, American Jewry has never felt, this is the first time that they felt less safe than Israeli Jewry. And so this has been a watershed moment on a collective unconscious type level.
And I'll say now what I said then. Come home, people. Come home. As soon as the gates open, don't miss the opportunity.
Right. And by the way, I have a nice banner. Here it is, Building Israel Together. Do you like that? Building Israel Together. That's our little slogan here. Oh, and by the way, if I'm already putting up slogans, let me also put up if you're going to be coming home, please come home and visit us in Hebron, the Jewish community of the mamas and the papas. They're waiting for you at home, and you can learn more about it, see great videos, and connect at hebronfund.org.
They'll ask you why you're not eating enough.
That's right. That's right. It's nice to nosh next to the tomb of the fathers and mothers. But anyway, there's this class of folks that are like upset at Israel for not like reaching out more, and this is exactly what I've said all along, that the destiny of American Jewry is to become more and more like a French Jewry or like a British Jewry that exist and they're proud, but at the same time a type of
they're top
satellite.
What's that? They're subsidiary to the center.
Right. And when there's a problem, they ask the center for help.
Yeah, which is fine. I think that you know that as much as I just made the call for everyone to come home, if you can, that's great. Not everyone can. Not everyone can financially. Not everyone can logistically. Not everyone can because it's just not who they are and where they're at. And thank God we live in a world where there are many ways to connect, right? But this is, you know, it's kind of like did you see that little tempest in the teacup that happened during the Gurion Tanachi, the Bible quiz,
Yeah.
where whoever it was like the director of the quiz or somebody said,
no,
like,
it was Avshalom Kor, the famous Hebrew linguist who's been moderating this event for years and years. He's considered the person who speaks Hebrew the best in the country. By the way, he's from an American background. And yes, and that's part of it. That's part of it. He is a died in the blue. He's died in the Tchelet. That's what I call him. Died in the Tchelet Zionist. And he made these little remarks, mini, tiny, snipey remarks that were like, well, how could you be happy you live in the diaspora? So a lot of people got angry at him. Not so much the diaspora, but other Israelis who felt that he was talking down to the diaspora and kind of, what do you mean there's something secondary in terms of the hierarchy of goodness that you're living in the diaspora? That's wrong to say. And I think he could have said it a little gentler maybe if he had to say it. But the bottom line is that you're right, that people got upset with him.
And I think part of the tension there, and it's interesting, I didn't realize it was mostly Israelis that got upset, is that the power of being in Israel is the power of having a platform to succeed in our mission. If we're not willing to focus on mission, on a collective effort to bring redemption, not just to our people, but to the world as a whole. So like what? Like, live where it works for you in your individualistic life. And that's why, unfortunately, there's a segment of our society, even here today, that would leave, if they could, or at least talks about that as if it were, here or there, Berlin, Tel Aviv, what difference does it make to me? It's because another sort of failure is perhaps a little bit too dramatic. Another place where we're lagging is in digging deeply into our national historic spiritual mission and educating everyone, not just about it as a concept, but activists. Like what are you doing right now to push the project forward?
Right. And that's one of my messages when I'm in front of audiences in America a lot of times, or outside of the land of Israel, which is, what's the step that you take? And that's why I don't only preach Aliyah, because I feel that's the highest of the steps, but there are many intermediary steps that you could take, many steps you could take towards the project, including, as I always say to people, drink Israeli wine, especially Friday night. Buy Israeli wine. Excellent to buy from Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, and drink some good settler wine where you're going to feel that you're walking in the footsteps of the fathers and the mothers and the prophets, and you're part of it, and not because you want to support it, but because you want it in your veins, inside your body. So you want to be part of it. You want it to be part of you. Okay, Rabbi Mike, we've spoken for 30 minutes. Just to remind people, I'm happy to host you today on my Facebook and YouTube page, and on the Yishai Fleisher Show at the Land of Israel Network, landofisrael.com. And we are live. We used to record this before Corona in podcast form, then put it out. Now we are actually live. So that's a lot of fun. And speaking of live, we have some folks that are saying hi. We have Sarah Israel saying shalom, and she's got all cute little signs there, including a Star of David, the earth, and a peace sign. Lee Rosen says, great quotation from Rav Mike. You don't need to be perfect to be a hero. Right. Very good. And Ratnawati says shalom, and she also gives the Indian namaste sign, so she may be from those areas. And Casimo says he says 13 viewers, big contents, right? We actually have 21 viewers right now, but big content. And also shalom, Shaul says, thank you both from Ma'ale Adumim, one of our favorite places in the land of Israel. Rabbi Mike, that's right. We've been speaking for 30 minutes. Let's get to the Torah portion. We have a lot to cover. Now, let's get to the Torah portion. All right, I'm just picking from the stuff that I picked out here. Number one is I wanted to get to the mitzvah of counting 7 years, 7 times, the cycle of sevens. But just 1 second. Liad says, do you feel my good friend Liad, Rabbi Liad Brody says, do you feel we're putting up a decent fight on social media against these characters like Rashida? I don't think we have I don't think we're the hot social media. That's if you ask me, I don't think we're hot. And I think we're not hot. My opinion is because we're not fully robust and honest. Like I don't think like we're like if we would be like more like clear what we are, what we believe in, and be like more gritty about it, you know what I mean? But since we always try to like kind of, you know, say it a little bit softer, we're always trying to soften the stances, soften who we really are, soften our position.
Well, we're people of nuance and complexity, and
right.
it doesn't carry that well in the world
right.
of Twitter.
I mean, imagine. And you know what's making me think to do it? Imagine if there was a picture of a lady like Gal Gadot with an Israeli flag draped over her, holding a little dog dressed in a Palestinian flag.
Right.
Can you imagine what that would do?
We get a lot of reactions. Also, by the way, we don't have to go into it now, but whose hand is the dog licking? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, who's it? I feel like it's the Euros. That's what I feel like the Euro.
I think that blue sleeve is a little indicative of who's actually controlling the dog.
Who? Oh, the Israelis. Yes,
we're going to go for analysis.
All right, good.
You said it. I didn't say it.
All right, here we go. First thing is the Torah portion. Now we're in the. Let me just bring it up so people can see it a little bit. Screen share
and so you can play a little bit with your
what's
platform
that?
that you love. And so you can play with the platform that you love so much.
Yeah, I love it so much. It's true. And we're in the Torah reading for Behar, the Torah portion of Behar. Oh, perfect. There it is right there. Okay, I use when I go to the internet and I want to see Torah portion, I think that Chabad.org does a great job of putting up Torah portion. There are many more commentaries, but they have Rashi right there in Hebrew and in English. And if we go to the verse 6 of chapter 25, it says, Vaita Shabbat ha'aretz. And the land on the 7th year fallow, right? We have this idea of a sabbatical year. The land will have a Shabbat ha'aretz. It will have a Sabbath of the land. And the Sabbath of the land is supposed to mimic the idea of the Sabbath that human beings need rest on the 7th day, the idea of a Shabbat, and recognition that God is the creator on the 7th day. That's a commandment for Jewish people. So too, on the 7th year, the land has to rest. This is one of the premises throughout the whole rest of the 2 Torah portions that we're going to be covering here. Yes. Is this idea that the land is a persona. It's a personality. It has its own traits. It can take things and not take things. And it needs rest. And it needs a certain kind of rest. And it needs a year for the land to also kind of have a spiritual time. So that's the premise. Now, Shabbat ha'aretz, I have said that this Corona period has been like a Shabbat ha'aretz, as though the globe went on a global Sabbath. There's been a global Sabbath, especially in terms of nature.
Yes.
Nature has had a Sabbath from us. Would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the pictures out there have been overwhelming of like animals returning to habitat, the skies clearing in places where people haven't seen the horizon in decades, you know. And it's just one of those things that we just need to keep pointing out that there is no going back to what was. So therefore, if there's something that we found in this enforced confinement that we want to preserve, then it's in our power to do so. You know, but yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder if we're going to speed up to the point that we're going to totally forget this whole period and it's not going to be remembered.
I think people want to, but the reality is, first of all, I'm not a believer that we're done. Right. This I see in our society in particular right now, there's a sense of like done. People like the mask is like down below the chin or it's on my hand, and like the buses are filling up, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I don't think that it's going to be that quick. A. B, the economic wave, we have not yet really begun to understand what's happened. Right. Once China and the United States, the world's 2 biggest economies, not to mention what's happened to the European Union, right, are taking the type of blow they're taking, that's like a slow motion wave. Right.
And by the way, interesting that you mentioned China. We have a guest in town right now. Secretary of State Pompeo flew in for a few hours. Hold on, look at this. Here we go. I have one of the classic
Pompeo
wine bottles, and ostensibly, Secretary of State Pompeo is here to talk about actually limiting cooperation with China. That is one of the big topics, ostensibly. That's what news reports are coming out and saying. along with other things, and probably the discussion about annexation and moving forward with.
And I imagine a little bit of strategic talk about Iran.
Right,
and Iran.
Okay.
But anyway, I wanted to say about the arts.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's a very important concept. And this 7x7 cycle, which, by the way, we're also now in the time of the Omer counting, which is another annual 7x7 cycle. And so what does it mean that the land will have a rest, that has Shabbat? Because Shabbat, you use that phrase, which is correct, that Shabbat is a time in which we recognize God as creator. But Shabbat is also a time in which we recognize ourselves in the world as something which is intrinsic and not a means to an end. We're not just a doing machine. We're not even a creating machine. We're a being, right? And you find a sense of wholeness of self, which is not about what you do, but rather about what you are on Shabbat. In the same way, the danger of the relationship to land as a means to an end, that which we use to get what we want, is that it's incredibly destructive, and it will create an economic structure and a culture which will undermine the foundations of its own existence, which is sadly happening in the world today. Whereas Shabbat Haaretz is not just about, hey guys, take a break. So just recognize that the land doesn't exist for us. It's not a means to the ends of our needs. Right. It has kedusha, it has sanctity, and the primary definition of sanctity is a thing which has an intrinsic nature, and not just one which is a utility.
I get what you're saying, and I really love it a lot. I want to kind of just say it another way so that some people that maybe didn't quite catch what you're saying is like, it's like being married. It's like the other person's not there to fulfill your needs. That other person is real. That other person has got a life and a personality and a soul, and you got to care for that person. And if mutual needs are met, and they should be in a marriage, that's great. But it's a love, it's a relationship, it's a building, it's a giving back and forth. And what you're saying is sometimes when we're in the mode of utility and we're working the land, and we're working our lives, and like you sometimes forget to like have that relationship, to see the other as a valued thing. And that's what I started by saying, that the Torah portion kind of seems to indicate a few different ways that the land is an entity, it's a persona. If anything, I would say, now that I think about it, there's 3 different ways in which the Torah portion says to you that the land of Israel is a persona. 1, it needs a Sabbath. 2, if you misbehave, it'll kick you out and take its Sabbaths. But it'll vomit you out if you misbehave. And meaning say it needs a rest. It also does not like idolatry or licentiousness, bad things. It'll kick you out. And 3, towards the end, it says, and I will remember Abraham, I will remember Isaac, I will remember Jacob, and I will remember the land. And the Emma Banim Smecha says, that means to say, even if I can't remember the forefathers, I'm going to remember the land of Israel because I have a covenant with the land itself. The land is also an entity, if you will. People who watch Star Trek, I've said this in other years, people who watch Star Trek have an easier time understanding that a chunk of land will be, have a personality and is a creature, right? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you're
tough. Okay, I wanted to get to the next topic, which is, it says in the Torah portion, verse 8, let's just look at it for a second, and let me put it up properly here. This is the way I want to put it up, and here it is. So verse 8, it says, Usfarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim, sheva shanim, sheva pa'amim. You shall count for yourself 7 sabbatical years, 7 years, 7 times. And the days of these 7 sabbatical years shall amount to 49 years for you. Fine. Now, why did I want to stop on this? Because when it comes to counting, do you remember last week you said that the time between Elul and Rosh Hashanah is between Elul and the end of Sukkot is a time of personal fixing. You're fixing your like personal thing, and then we also have a period that we have a national accountability, a national rectification. This thing here, 7 years. Who is counting 7 years? Is it individuals that are counting 7 years? No, it should be a national goal to count 7 years, right? But it specifically says you, individuals, should count the 7 years. And when it talks about the 49 days of counting from second day of Passover until Shavuot, till Pentecost, it says you plural shall count this. When you would think that it would be something that is specific to individuals, because we're doing individual rectification. So here it's like, I want every single individual in the nation to count those 7 years. Our national goals are important on the individual level as well. And the individual is important on a national level as well. Meaning to say, the state, the country, should not be more important than the individual. You should all count the 49 days that helps individual people get better. That's part of our national identity, every individual person. So I think that the Torah purposefully switches the who's the counter in order to tell you that this is important. This 7 years and 7 times 7 heading towards the Jubilee is important on a personal level and certainly on a national level.
I think it's a critical insight, because with the tensions between the particular and the collective that the Torah sort of engages on every front, we really are encouraged to understand that the purpose of society is to allow the individual to enter into relationship with God. But the purpose of an individual entering into relationship with God is to build a better world, right? It's never a sort of narcissistic, like, society exists for me as a platform for my relationship, because the only reason my relationship comes to, or let's say the only way my relationship comes to fruition is through the actions in the world that God wants me to do to make the world a better place. So there's almost an iterative process there. So it's a nice insight there. Thank you.
Later on in chapter 25, verse 23, let's look at it together. It says, it looks like I've got to go to Shani here. Just 1 second. 23. Loading it up. Oh, it's in Shlishi, is it? Okay, very good. Yeah, there was a short Shani. Right, the Torah portions are divided into seven parts. So verse 23 says, V'aretz lo timaker letzmitut, the land should not be sold permanently. For the land belongs to me. Kili ha'aretz. God says, I'm the actual owner of the land. Ki gerim v'toshavim atem yodi. For you are strangers and residents with me. That reminds us, of course, of the great phrase that Abraham says when he's purchasing a land. He says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. He says, I am a stranger and a resident with you, he says to the Hittites. But here says Hashem, like, look, I want you to follow all these laws, but the bottom line is you can't sell it. You can't mistreat the land. You can't sell it for eternity because it's not yours to sell. One of the key things to understand here is it's my land. You are dwelling with me. It's my land, as opposed to you thinking that it's your land to sell.
And on a certain level, we belong to it because it creates our collective existence, and we're giving the deep expression to the relationship between creator and created that the land in its own right already embodies. It's only humanity that can deviate. You know what I'm saying? It's like creation without us gives expression to the will of the creator flawlessly. So humanity, because of our special gifts and our particular burdens, we're only a segment of creation that can kind of like deviate from that plan. So the whole idea is we belong to the land, because the thing that the land can't do without is give that higher articulation of the divine will. Right. Right. And on a simple, by the way, I don't want to miss in the sort of spiritual poetics, the very important simple economic assertion here, which is this is what is known in economic terms as usufruct. Right? It's not private property. It's we own the usage of the land. We don't own the land itself. And that does a couple things. First of all, it's just humbling, which I think that the tone of the verse, as you captured nicely, is meant to do. But it also encourages us to build a different type of economic system. And this is the coming wave. It's bound up with the environmental problems that have been created by our current economic system. We need to begin to delve deeply into the Torah and try to understand, without some sort of simplistic sense, we're just going to recreate what the Torah wants, et cetera. That's not the way our sages related to the Torah. But we need to delve deeply into it to understand what is the real wisdom of how you build a society of justice, of prosperity, right, of equity and vision and growth that doesn't just eat the foundations out from under itself in the way in which we're doing today.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is so important, and you sometimes walk into the bank and you think to yourself, I'm just trying to buy a house here in the land of Israel, and I have to pay through the nose this overpriced what's it called, mashkanta mortgage, and you think to yourself, wait a minute, shouldn't it be that the laws of this land, the Torah, the way we all make money is so to help me grow, and so when I grow, you'll grow, we'll all grow together? Why do I get the sense that you're trying to choke me, as opposed to what the Torah says here? Do not take what's it called, interest. Yeah. Do not take interest from your Jewish brother and sister. Don't choke. That's like my simple way of reading the whole thing. Don't choke the other residents of the land with you.
Listen, at the risk of sounding like a socialist, the Torah doesn't envision the accumulation of private property as the end goal of economic activity.
Right.
Right. Now, the Torah does allow for private property on the realm of what we call metaltalin, movable goods. Torah doesn't really recognize private property in the realm of land, and certainly in its context, that was the basis of all economic activity. And so this is what I'm saying. So the sort of utopian.
Although it's important to say that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were rich. It's just important to say that the Torah is not against.
Not against wealth, not against prosperity, but it doesn't envision. What you said is that, wait, shouldn't the purpose of this be helping me grow and thrive? Right? I mean, the purpose of economic activity in our current system is to maximize the ability to consume. That is its purpose. That's the structure that we have. And that, by definition, since we don't live in an infinite resource pool, is going to destroy itself. But the Torah envisions more of what you were saying, which is the purpose of economic activity is growth and health and wealth of the individual and society, spiritually, materially, physically, et cetera, right? And that's a different aim, because it would force us as a society to try to identify very clearly what are the primary values toward which we want to work. And then, like what the actual economic system is, it just depends on what works.
I'm going to say something radical. I have said this in conferences, because of my political leanings. So I end up speaking a lot of times on in the conservative world, conservative panels. But I say something that conservatives don't like, American conservatives. I say, look, socialism comes from the word social. And when you have a social fabric, so you're more given to being social. In simple terms, if a girl in Ramat Gan needs a hip surgery and she's my sister, not my actual sister, who's, by the way, listening right now on the show, Rachel Fleisher-Vinnick. Yeah, but she's my
as part of your family.
Right, she's part of my family, and so I want to contribute towards that surgery. Yeah. So you might say that's socialized medicine. Well, yeah, and the Torah seems to say there's certain elements that I certainly want you to be socialized. There are other elements. If you're a person who works harder than other people, and you've got a wherewithal and you've got a business means, sure, you know what I mean. Get what you deserve. But you
know what's beautiful though? The Torah puts at the center of all this the temple.
Mm-hmm,
It's often missed that the tithing system is a means for conspicuous consumption. Like today, you go on, I don't know, Instagram or wherever, and you'll see the world's richest people consuming conspicuously. It's a big thing. Pictures and yachts and this. But think about the fact that the Torah says now take 10% of your wealth, go to Jerusalem, and have a party.
Right.
Right? And because it recognizes that there is indeed a human need which is being fulfilled.
A holy party, though.
A holy party, for sure.
Right.
But there's a human need.
It's not, because some people hear the word party, they may think you're talking about hedonism.
No. But it is, by the way, it's not hedonism, but the only things you can spend that, what's called Meiser Sheni, we get in the details, but the only thing you can spend it on are things that people derive pleasure from: meat, wine, oil, right? Meaning the idea is indeed to bring enjoyment, physical enjoyment, in a sacred environment, in order to sort of like take that desire we all have to both enjoy the world and to be seen enjoying the world, and to elevate it toward gratitude and sharing.
Right, and it's interesting thing that you said the word seen, and I think I know what you're referring to. There's a mitzvah of lirot ulehiraot, to see and be seen.
Just think about the fact that the only place you can spend 10% of your income is Jerusalem. That's it.
Right.
Everybody.
Beautiful. The reason I'm saying is because I could feel it. People who have been part of coming to Yerushalayim, during the 3 festivals can feel it. I had an idea that in Israel we would issue a card like one of these subway these light rail cards that we have, Ravkav that we have in Israel, like a yellow card, and this yellow card would be called a regalim card, and you could amass points on it, and you could only spend that in Jerusalem, and it would help you with parking, help you with restaurants.
That's a great example. Imagine the tax system taking the tithe, if 10%, if whatever,
right,
and it going directly there, and that freeing up Jerusalem to focus on its real mission, which is educating the world in the depths of the human experience.
Right. Beautiful, love it, love it. By the way, I think similarly, there should be it's such a big thing. You know what I learned? In Saudi Arabia, they have a ministry of the Hajj. A ministry dedicated to the Hajj.
There are 1 billion+ Muslims in the world. I mean, you've got to have somebody in charge.
You got to be in charge, and it's a big thing. So we need a ministry of the Regalim. Or at least under the Jerusalem affairs, it needs to be.
I'm sure in this government, they're more than willing to give it to somebody. They'll give you 2.
Very good. Okay, let's get to some of the most seminal verses in the Torah, especially in this week's Torah portion, and an amazing Rashi there. So we're going to go to chapter 25. 1 second, let me get it set up so we go see it correctly. Chapter 25. And the verses are 38 and on. 38 and on.
Saw it coming.
Yeah.
You're
you bet you did. You bet. You bet. So let's just make sure we got 38. Am I there? There it is. Oh, there it is. And give me Rashi, please.
The old-fashioned style here.
What's that? Yeah. That's good. But I want everybody on this that's watching to be able to see it. I have also the book in front of me, but we go to 38. And it says, Ani Hashem Elokechem, I am Hashem your God, Asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, who took you out of the land of Egypt, latet lachem et eretz Canaan, to give you the land of Canaan, liot lachem la'Elohim, to be unto you a God. And says Rashi, to give you the land of Canaan as a reward for accepting my commandments. And that's an interesting phrasing, that you get the land of Israel as a reward for accepting my commandments. And in other places, it'll say the only reason you get to keep the land of Israel is for accepting my commandments. My commandments really only fully are in full fruition in the land of Israel.
Remember, Rashi is most likely quoting the Midrash. I don't know if I can't see quite, the screen's not big enough, but oftentimes one of the nice things about the Chabad site is that they'll cite the source that Rashi's quoting. But what his language is echoing is schar mitzvah. Right. That the reward for mitzvah is the opportunity to do more mitzvot. So when it says, right, that latet lachem eretz Canaan, they give you the land as a reward that we're sort of accepting my mitzvot, and therefore you'll be able to do more mitzvot in the land of Canaan. Right.
The bottom line is in various ways that you could read it. The bottom line is 2 things are locked into one another: the land of Israel and the keeping of the Torah.
Okay.
Both of those are, by the way, called morashah. The Torah is called an eternal inheritance, morashah, and the land of Israel is called morashah. It's an eternal inheritance. These things are engaged to one another. They are united. The land of Israel and the keeping of the Torah. These things go together. And notice that the generation that kind of started up the modern state of Israel were a secular variety, and this is a secular state. But more and more, we're moving back to our natural mode of Judaism, which is a land of Israel, which is centered around Judaism, or Judaism that is centered around the land of Israel. Those are both true. But then let's read this very famous Rashi that follows immediately afterwards. It says, "Liot lachem leElohim, to be unto you a God." Shekol. This is a Gemara, right? Ketubot 110b, as it says here in the Chabad page, like you pointed out. It says, "Shekol hadar be'eretz Yisrael." Anybody who lives in the land of Israel, ani lo leElohim, I am to him a God. V'kol hayotze mimena, but anybody who leaves it, ke'oved avodah zara, is like he serves idolatry. This is a very famous, Rashi quotes this. I think the Rambam also quotes this in a place, but it's a very powerful statement. And Rashi, who's living in Provence, writing this this powerful phrase that I am. The Torah says, the verse is, I'm gonna give you the land of Israel, so that I could be a God unto you. Those things are linked. Those things are linked up.
I mean, the Gemara is a little bit more, let's say, judgmental than even what happened at the Bible quiz, in the sense that it's important to remember that God is never an abstraction, and unfortunately, both religion and philosophy lend themselves to the attitude that God's an abstraction. So therefore, I mean, and since God is the ultimate, we just don't even have to qualify that. So, of course, God's the same in Brooklyn as God is in Nairobi, as God is in Jerusalem. That's not a question. The difference is you're not the same, and therefore the relationship which is available is not the same. And I think it's very specific that this is the general name was, I will be to you as a God. It doesn't say I'll be Hashem. It doesn't say that the particular relationship between the Jewish people and Am Yisrael will be actualized only in the land of Israel. It says I'm going to be actual Elohim, meaning in the land of Israel is where you can engage me through the world, where your actions will show that I am God. You understand the difference I'm making? It's not that someone who lives out of the land by definition doesn't have a relationship to God. It's that there's a specific embodied world-changing relationship which is available in the land of Israel.
I just want to say that what you just said right now is true in the text, but it's also very true in real life. Meaning to say, people who live here know that on so many levels. One of the things that I've learned as I've matured, I'm still trying to mature.
Let me know when that happens. I have to figure it out.
And when it gets fully gray, the black means I've not yet matured totally. But like, I've realized that truths, when there's a real truth, it is so deep that there are many, many, many levels of analysis, many levels of understanding that are all true.
Yeah.
And
the other way of saying that, by the way, is as you grow, it grows, meaning you discover more in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You also forget some, sadly, because you sometimes reach great conclusions earlier on and you forget them. But my point too is that the what you just said, that like the land of Israel embodies Torah, when you live in it, you're fully kind of plugged into it, and you feel like, I'm saying it's not just a textual thing. It's if you live here, and you might even be secular, and you might be Haredi, or you might be, I don't know what, you feel that there's a God in this land. By the way, some people complain about the city of Jerusalem, that it's very intense. I've heard that many times.
It's quite intense.
And that intensity is not in any fast or dangerous traffic, or there's nothing ostensibly so intense about it. No. But there is something there. It's a live wire.
Yeah, just life is very intense there.
Yeah, it's just intense and intense. And I personally found that there was no other than the only similarity that I found was New York City, Manhattan. Interestingly, by the way.
There, the intensity, I think it has a different root.
Right. Absolutely. But I just mean to say it's hyper intense. It's it's a pole in this world. I called it a long time ago, Israel's the spiritual superpower. Or in that case, it's the capital of spirituality is Jerusalem. All right, we got to start heading towards the end. So I want to get to a few more verses. Let's get to the good news. There's wonderful promises for the Jewish people if they follow the Torah, if they follow God's ways in the land of Israel. And there's a lot to say there, but let's just go to chapter 26. We've now skipped to the next Torah portion, excuse me, which is Bechukotai. And let's hit verse 11 of chapter 26. Let me just pull it up on the screen here. And there it is. Okay, one of the greatest blessings of them all. V'natati mishkani b'tochachem. I'll give my dwelling in your midst, which is either the tabernacle or the temple. That's a higher level. In your midst. V'lo tigal nafshi etchem. My spirit will not reject you. Or another modern way of saying it is, I won't be grossed out by you.
Am I going to spit you out?
What's that?
Well, as Rashi says that kol ge'ilah lashon pleita davar abalua b'davar, right? Meaning it's an expunging That's why.
Right. The old vomiting. The land will vomit you out. Right. And God is how should we say? He's holy, and He's not going to withstand our unholiness to walk amongst us. Although, luckily, there are also verses that God says, even in your bad times, I'm with you. Even when you're low, I'm with you.
Well, I mean, when it comes specifically regarding the mission, Shochenit Eitchem Toch Tumatchem. That dwells amongst you even in the midst of your impurity. Right,
but that's a kindness. That's not the highest level. The highest level is here, like that you'll be a holy people and I can walk amongst you. And it says exactly that. I shall walk amongst you or within you, even within every single one of you. I will be within you. I'm going to be unto you a God. And you will be a nation unto me. You'll be my people. Such a powerful phrase. And of course, when we hear the word hitalachti about God, when I walk amongst, we of course remember the Garden of Eden, and there it is. Rashi says, "Etayeli machem began Eden kechad mikem." I'm going to walk amongst you as I was almost one of you. You won't be shocked from me. I'll put you on such a level that you'll be able to deal with me, like Moses. Could it be that you won't fear me? God forbid. No. Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, "Va'iti lachem le'Elohim." I'll be unto you a God. Meaning to say you'll still fear me and respect me, but I'll be close to you. I'll be able to deal with you. You'll be able to deal with me. Can I use that kind of modern phraseology?
Sure, go for it. I mean, you just did.
Right. So, would you say that is the penultimate of?
I mean, that's the purpose. And going back to one of the themes that's been flowing through our conversation so far is that without a sense of what it is you're trying to achieve, then your actions will at best be harmless. Whereas if you have a sense of what the vision you're working toward looks like, then even if you're challenged or you suffer failures, etc., in the end of the day, you can keep that for momentum. And so one of the reasons I think this is the highest blessing is we can understand that the vision that the Torah puts forward of the purpose of the Jewish people is to connect heaven and earth, right? And every individual has a chance to do that within their own heart and their actions, but we have a special grace as a people, as a nation, to do it on behalf of all creation, right? That's why God says to Avram that Lecha go leave everything you know to the land I'll show you, and what I'll make you there. What? A goy gadol, a great nation, not a great person.
Right.
Avram was already a great person, or God wouldn't have reached out. The vision is that there should be a people as a whole who have a capacity to connect heaven and earth in a way in which the whole world can benefit. And that's really what I see in this verse.
And you mentioned Abraham, which is the great transition to the last verse that I want to cover today, which is verse 42 of chapter 26.
Right.
Right. And the chapter and the verse says there, "V'zacharti et briti Yaakov." I will remember my covenant with Jacob. V'af et briti Yitzchak, and my covenant with Isaac. V'af et briti Avraham, and my covenant with Abraham. So it goes in reverse order. Eskor, I will remember my covenant with Abraham. V'ha'aretz eskor, and I'm going to remember the land. And this is a wild Rashi that says that 5 places in the Tanakh is Yaakov's name spelled with this extra vav, so as to make a Yaakov. But we just have we don't need that vav. We just have a grammar law that makes it Yaakov without it. And at the same time, there are 5 places in the Tanakh where Elijah's name, is written in short form. Very famously, at the end of the Tanakh, right. Oh, Sefer this is at the end of Nevi'im, right? Thank you. And so it's Eliyahu, but spelled short, in a short way. Says Rashi, Yaakov took these vavs from Elijah as let me read it in the English. The 5 instances of the 5 symbolize the 5. Oh, wait, where's that? Oh, no. It says the 5 places. Jacob took the letter Vav from the name of Elijah as security, collateral, that he will come and herald the redemption of Jacob's children. And they add in parentheses from the Gur Aryeh, and since this is Elijah's mission in life, his name will remain incomplete, as it were, until he fulfills it speedily in our days. The 5 instances of the Vav symbolize the 5 fingers of the hand. This security arrangement between Jacob and Elijah was sealed by a handshake. Interesting. Interesting. Okay.
You're not doing handshakes anymore. No more.
Right. It was just a nod. It was a nod. But the point is that hidden in that promise that God is going to remember the forefathers and the land is also a hidden promise of redemption that will come when Elijah the prophet will herald the Messianic period, the Messianic times.
Well, I mean, you can do your homework, but in my reading, Zechirah, what we translate as remembering, when it's said in reference to God, is always a redemptive power.
Mm-hmm.
Every single usage.
Mm-hmm. Right. I could see that with Noah, with Rachel, etc., with Sarah. These are all Rosh Hashanah. We have the Zechirot, and we also actually say these 6 Zechirot in the end of davening. Sometimes, some people do anyway. This Torah portion, if we summed it all up, is really about the laws of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, keeping the land in sanctity, being and having real security coming from the Maker of this world. We didn't touch so much about it, but you're going to lay in security. Why? Because you followed my laws, and I'm your protector.
Because these are the laws of the society as a whole, because you built a world in which I can dwell, and that's what makes you secure.
Before we go, Rabbi Mike Feuer, I just want to read a few of the comments. Says Stanley, he says, what do you do in terms of tours for Gentiles? The answer is, come on down. You know what I mean?
Whatever you're looking to see.
Yeah, like we're here to teach, and people who are open-minded and want to hear about our history and about the Torah and about God's promise to Abraham and the purchase and all that. Just come on down. We are equal opportunity teachers, so please come on down, and we'll keep it 100% open to you. We are not going to limit it from our Gentile friends. But of course, come to listen, not to preach some other form. Says Zara Israel says, yes, it is the Shabbat for humanity and our earth. It is also humbling. She's talking about the coronavirus. I'm going to move on. There's my sister. She says, great stuff again. God bless you. My sister Racheli. Jay says, awesome stuff. Stanley says, great talk. And then we got here's somebody very important, all the way from Sweden. Says Erica from Sweden. Her last name is Nordstrom. I like you already. I feel like I'm back in Bergenfield. Erica from Sweden says, shalom, great comments, rabbis, as usual. Blessings to all of you. Shalom and blessings to you, Erica from Sweden. Thank you so much for joining us, and keep on being connected with us, please. I also want to say, Lou says, excellent share and insights. Thank you, Yishai and Rav Mike. And says Stanley, thank you. We shall come with listening ears. Amen. Amen. And let's last one says Yehudi. Zara says Yehudi has all 4 letters of our Creator's name, with the addition of the Dalet, which is a door. Dalet is like a delet, which is a door. This inspires awe. So there you go, folks from around the world are connected to us, Rabbi Mike, and I want people to check out all the stuff that you're doing. You just put out a great podcast that I am so excited for, which is about the prelude to the 6-Day War. I'm totally psyched for that.
We're slowly there. It's going to take some time.
I'm psyched for the prelude. I like Malka and I. We like the lead ups, in the movies. Yeah, not when it's like the big stuff is happening, but the lead up, the build up, the training, the whole thing. So we're excited for that. Please check out Rav Mike's website, jewishstory.co. His other show on the Land of Israel Network, which is called jewishstory.com, the Jewish Story, and also Rav Mike is found at Facebook, facebook.com/Rav Mike. Did I miss anything?
Nope, that'll do it.
That'll do it. Good. We're learning the Torah portion of Behar-Bechukotai. And help us please keep broadcasting by visiting YishaiFleisher.com/donate. Buy a cup of coffee. Great way to support broadcasting. I don't even say podcasting anymore, because now we're doing it in different forms. And again, I recommend that. What's that?
We're way beyond that.
We're way beyond that. We're doing it real live, real time and live. And of course, also check out. And check out hebronfund.org to visit the fathers and the mothers. Rabbi Mike Feuer, thank you so much for joining me. I want to wish you
Always
a Shabbat Shalom. God bless you. God bless you. Shabbat Shalom. And thank you for coming on. And thank you, folks, for being with me. Lots of love from the land of Israel. Lots of blessings from the land of blessings. And please don't be embarrassed to throw out an email, Yishai@thelandofisrael.com or Yishai@YishaiFleisher.com. Also very good, YishaiFleisher.com. And just finishing up, Bill says shalom from Tulane, Illinois. I don't know how to pronounce that properly, but hi, Bill from Illinois. Shalom. Erica says we met in Tisha B'Av 2017. Baruch Hashem, let's meet again. And Marie says shalom from the UK. So it's so beautiful to be able to connect to people around the world and connect over what? Over a love of the land of Israel, a love of Torah, and a love of others who want to connect on these beautiful and holy levels. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. God bless you. And of course, write me an email, Yishai@thelandofisrael.com and Yishai@YishaiFleisher.com. You take your pick, whatever connects, whatever suits your fancy. But more than anything, brachot, blessings from the land of Israel, and shalom. All right, folks, that was Rabbi Mike Feuer. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. Rav Mike. He prefers Rav Mike and not Rabbi Mike. Rav Mike, and connect with him. And it's so important I don't feel like I've done my work for the week if I didn't do a Torah podcast where we discussed the Psukim, the eternal word of Hashem. It's just the only way to move forward. And as I said in the Rav Mike section, today's show is dedicated to Amit Ben Yigal, who was killed in action this week. A beautiful, beautiful young man, and it breaks the heart that we lost him. This show's dedicated to him. If you want to dedicate the show to anybody or to anything, please write me an email, Yishai@YishaiFleisher.com or Yishai@thelandofisrael.com. It's really easy to connect. And let's dedicate something. Let's dedicate some Torah learning or a show or a project. I have many, many important and interesting projects going on, so would love to connect with you on that. Let's listen now to my discussion with Dr. Sherry Sufi, who is a linguist and a researcher of nationalism who studied the story of Israel as well, about the question of, is Israel a colonialist European enterprise or not? So this is very interesting. It's very much part of the narrative war, an important podcast, an important section of the podcast about a guy who, about a man who wrote a very, very interesting piece, and we'll be discussing it right now. So without further ado, here we go.
Decision, says Paul Tillich, is a risk rooted in the courage of being free. Now, I'm feeling pretty free right now, and I've got the courage to take some risks because I've made a decision. This is the last episode of Season 2. I'm Rav Mike Feuer, and this is the Jewish Story.
Join Rav Mike Feuer for the best Jewish history podcast, The Jewish Story, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
All right, folks, shalom and welcome to another discussion here on the Yishai Fleisher channel. We're going to be broadcasting stories and issues that touch Israel, touch the story of Israel. And in this half hour, we have a wonderful expert, Dr. Sherry Sufi, and he's a wonderful, wonderful thinker and writer out of West Australia, who has a PhD in linguistics. And he also, amongst that, focused on Hebrew language and Israeli national identity. And he wrote an article recently, which I thought was absolutely fabulous. It was called Israel, Not a European Colony. You could see it on the Times of Israel. And I thought it was a quite important article that everybody has to get a chance to read. And we'll be reading some of it today, and we'll be talking with him also about it. And I guess the reason this is so important to me is because today, as I've talked about on my various networks, and I'm sure you know, we have a war. It's not a physical war as much. Yes, there's still Iran's nuclear interests, and there's Hezbollah and Hamas, and there's still attacks here and there. But there's another kind of war that we're fighting today, and that war, I call it the narrative war, and I saw that Dr. Sherry Sufi also likes that terminology. There's a narrative war, and that narrative war is out there to erase the Jewish narrative or to make it ugly or dirty, to besmirch the name of Israel. Now, the narrative war has a lot of actual very focused tactics. One of the tactics is to undermine the history of Israel, and the big word is colonialism and occupation. These two terms go along with one another, and the basic idea is that Jews are white Europeans who have colonialized and therefore occupied Palestine, and are therefore foreigners and necessarily abusers. There's a logic here. And if you go out to social media, you're going to see that over and over and over again, that there is such a narrative out there that Israel is a foreigner. Well, Dr. Sherry Sufi wrote an article really debunking that, and his style of writing is very special. But he goes right at the heart, and sometimes not coming from a Jewish perspective, not coming from an internal Jewish kind of dialogue, but rather looking at it from the outside. He has a very powerful way of bringing it in. And so I am very pleased to have Dr. Sherry Sufi with us today. Dr. Sherry, how are you? Good to see you.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's good to be with you again. It's been a while since we met up over there. But
that's right.
Yeah.
And you're a person who regularly comes in to the land of Israel, and you bring tourists, but not just tourists, actually high-level folks, policymakers from Australia to Israel. And so I was always impressed with the fact that you were able to bring people, but this article took it to a totally different level from my perspective. And here's the article again from the Times of Israel. And again, it's called Israel is Not a European Colony. Why don't you just start with just telling me what brought you to write this? Why did you feel the need to write this? Yeah, it's out there, but why did you kind of tackle it?
Well, the reason why I wrote the article is because I've been sufficiently exposed to the narrative that gets pumped out by forces that are opposed to the state of Israel. And I think I've been, in a sense, fortunate enough to have had that level of understanding to get to the bottom of what it is that motivates them. And it's not a single thing, but one of the most fundamental reasons why they tend to oppose the state of Israel is the reason that you mentioned in your intro. It's that they have this belief that the Jews from Europe who started the Zionist movement towards the end of the 1800s and began settling into the Levant region, which was then under the Ottoman Empire, are Europeans. Now, they weren't, and I've tried to address this issue, I guess, from the point of view that if Europeans historically didn't think of Jews in their midst as fellow Europeans, and those Jews did not think of themselves as Europeans, then it's not really up to third parties to make that decision on anyone's behalf. It's, I mean, the whole point of, self-determination, we have this expression self-determination, is for people to determine what their group identity should be. It's not for third parties. And I thought that I would put things in historical perspective.
Indeed you did. And there's a lot of phrases here within the article that I want to tackle.
Sure.
So first thing you say, the Jewish exiles from Europe who began settling in pre-state Israel had a prior historic and civilizational relationship with the land. They weren't colonizers. All right, so then they'll say to you, first thing, that's just generally denied. Am I right that out there in the anti-Israel narrative, somehow the idea that Israel had a past in this country, in this land, had two commonwealths is somehow just like erased out of the mainstream consciousness? How does that come about?
Yeah, so there's people that have written entire PhD theses on this topic. I mean, this is very deep and complex, and part of what makes it really problematic to discuss is the fact that whilst Jewish history, I mean, it is unique, it is poorly understood, and that's not just by non-Jews, it's often poorly understood by Jews as well. So many Jews don't stop to sort of realize the experiences of earlier generations. Now, I'll talk you through two sets of unique experiences that only the Jewish people have had to that scale. Jewish history are divided up into two segments. So there's the 1,000-year period from the establishment of the ancient kingdom of Israel under Kings Saul, David, and Solomon, right up until the exile. There's that 1,000-year period. Why is that period unique? Because you're in your native land, but you are constantly being invaded by foreigners. The Assyrians in 721 BC, the Babylonians in 597 BC, the Persians in 539 BC, the Greeks in 332 BC, then the Romans around about 63 BC, and then the Romans would be the last set of people that would rule over you. So for a long time, Jews are experiencing what you would call galut whilst you're in your own land. And then you enter stage 2 when the temple gets destroyed in 70 CE, Common Era, or what others might call AD. And then in 135 CE or AD, Jews are in fact exiled from that land. So then you're experiencing galut in other people's lands. Now, under normal circumstances, what would have happened is, I think, if most civilizations or nations had to experience something remotely like this, galut at home, galut overseas, they would likely have dissolved into other cultures, converted to another religion, lost their identity, and become something else. The Jews are still here. Now, that's something miraculous. And because people tend to not have a deep understanding of this journey, I mean, the mere few sentences I've said in the last few minutes are not widely known. And because of that, people sort of look at Israel and they go, okay, well, these people came from Europe. Some of them resemble Europeans, so they must be Europeans, and therefore they don't belong here. And that's why the narrative war has to be won. We have to push back against that all the time. Every podcast is important, and so is every article.
Right. Well, the narrative is not just somebody's opinion. It is a weaponized narrative. There's a purpose for this narrative. It's not that it just kind of came up and there's a different perspective, different outlook, different academic perspective. No. This is a weaponized narrative. There's a purpose for this narrative, and that is to undermine Jewish rights, national rights, even Jewish self-narrative. I need to say the internal narrative of the Jewish people or the people around us or our allies. And when you undermine other people's understanding of your narrative and you undermine that nation's sense of their own narrative, well, you weaken their position. And in lieu of being able to destroy Israel with rockets, knives, tanks, or jets, the bad guys who want to undermine Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And by the way, I just kind of apropos today, I printed this out, which was an article that was written today, or put out today anyway, by Saib Arakat, the so-called chief negotiator of the Palestinian Authority. And he basically said, interestingly enough, he said there's been 3 fateful junctures in the story of Zionism. He says it's Balfour, the recognition of Jewish rights by the international community, then the 1948 Nakba, which he means by that the great tragedy, the great, what is the word that they use for Nakba? Catastrophe, right? Catastrophe of the Israeli victory of the Independence War. And he says the big third one is this, the move towards annexation. And of course, he sees this whole thing. He sees everything within what Israel is doing as being this colonialist project. And he keeps on saying this. This is colonialism. This is settlement. They've used the international community. They're really white Europeans. So therefore, the narrative is weaponized. It's not just something that some people have an opinion on. What do you think about that? What do you think about the weaponization of narrative?
Well, absolutely. It's not the weaponization that you talk about is not even a recent phenomenon. It's been weaponized since the very beginning. I mean, when the first Aliyah began happening around about 1882, and when Jews at the time predominantly from Europe began moving into the Levant, initially there's this period when the local Arabs, they actually see economic opportunity in the influx of European settlers within the land, and they weren't so hostile at all times. But what happens is when the Ottoman structure collapses and the administration passes over from the Ottoman to British rule, this is when substantial amounts of anti-Zionist activity is born. And it's always been weaponized. I mean, it's been to the opposition to Israel, I guess, it predates the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. It was at its peak of violence between sort of 1920 from the San Remo Conference all the way up to the Declaration of Independence in 48. But even beyond that, Israel's neighbors have attempted to set things right from their vantage point through conventional warfare. We've seen it in 48, and 56, 67, 73, 1982, 2006, and it hasn't really worked out. They've attempted it through, asymmetric warfare with two nationalist uprisings from 87 to 92, 93 with the first Intifada, then the second Intifada from 2000 to 2005, and it hasn't worked. And so the current manifestation of weaponization is lawfare. It's basically calling for international boycotts and sanctions and trying to use intellectual arguments to undermine the Jewish state. So whilst they've always hung on to this...
I just want to hang on to that for a second. I just want to say lawfare is a wing of narrative warfare. But there's other sides to it. There's also weakening your allies, weakening their sense of commitment to you because they're not sure that you're really the real deal. And I think one of the most powerful battles of narrative warfare is actually in this case, at the Jewish people themselves. When Jewish people themselves, and you hinted to that, don't know their own history, don't know their narrative very well, a different narrative sneaks in. I want to say that the land of Israel, the land of Palestine, if you will, abhors a vacuum. If you're not going to fill it with your strong narrative, somebody else is going to come. We just had this week a story of a Christian television channel called God TV trying to missionize in Israel. We have attempts to continue to create a two-state solution because that's the just solution, quote unquote. Or we have what we're talking about, which is just denial of the very fabric of Jewish history when Mahmoud Abbas wanted to sue the UK for the Balfour Declaration. So you have all kinds of attacks on narrative, and one of the key strategies against the narrative war is to have your own narrative set well. You have a phrase here, I've highlighted so many of your phrases, but my favorite, I think maybe a seminal phrase that I just got to hang on every time. But, your article is quite large, so I keep on losing my pages here. But you said basically that every time actual Europeans have come in contact with Jews in their native land, the end result has been anti-colonial resistance. Every time Europeans, who some people claim that we Jews are Europeans, you're saying every time actual Europeans come in contact with Jews in their native land, the end result has been anti-colonial resistance. And you name 3 times: Judah the Maccabee versus the Greeks in 167 to 160 BCE, Simon Bar Kokhba versus the Romans in 132 to 136 Common Era, and Menachem Begin versus the British 1939 to 1948. So it's kind of, according to that logic, it's very hard to say that the Jews are Europeans when every time they come in contact, as you've written, come in contact with Europeans, they're actually pushing them back. They're actually fighting with them.
Yeah. Look, we live in a day and age where people tend to often struggle to know the history of group identities, let alone expecting to know somebody else's. I mean, in an ideal world, people would not see the present as detached from the past, but rather see it as a product of the experiences that have happened in times prior to our own. But sadly, that is not the case outside the realm of history, the professional practice of history, which is why we need to bring these points out. Now, it's interesting you mention all of this because when I was in Jerusalem just a couple of months ago, I have very good friends there that who are not Jewish, non-Jewish people who live on that land, and you talk to them, and you talk them through those historical instances when Jewish people have come in contact with European colonizers in that land, and it's resulted in anti-colonial resistance, not in some sort of an alliance or whatever, or collusion of some sort, as is often falsely assumed. And they don't know these bits of detail. Now, the thing is that narratives have consequences. If one person believes a certain thing to be true, that may not have consequences, but if 5 of his mates also subscribe to that view, then you've got a cult. And when that idea spreads to, say, 1,000 people, then you've got a movement. And then the movement starts to demand certain political outcomes. So that's why narratives are important. And sadly, as you and I have both often identified, a large part of the problem is that lots of Jewish people aren't, I guess, equipped enough, aware enough of their own history. I mean, such a large part of Israeli society identifies as Hebrew-speaking Israelis rather than Jews. It's like they've created this level beneath secular, like there's this thing called secular Jew, but then my mates in Tel Aviv often tell me, like, no, I'm even next level up from, or next level down from that. I'm not a secular Jew, I'm a Hebrew-speaking Israeli. Now, those Hebrew-speaking Israelis, the best argument they can come up with if they were confronted by this truckload of criticism is, hey, we have a right to exist, and, take it or leave it, we have a right to defend ourselves. That may be true in its own right, but the person who, say, lives in Jericho or who lives in Ramallah or who lives in East Jerusalem, for that matter, who's subscribed to a different view on this, they're going to look at you and they're going to say, well, hang on a second. If you're not religiously Jewish or civilizationally Jewish or have any historical connection to this land, and you were born in, or your grandparents were born in Kiev, in Ukraine, why should you be here? And that's where my article comes into the picture. I'm telling you the argument that you need to tell that person and say, look, we have a civilizational link here. That's that.
So do you like the word indigeneity, or you're using a different term, which I like, civilizational link? By the way, that is the language that the international community used also in 1917 Balfour and 1920 the San Remo Accords, which they recognized the ancestral connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, what you would call a civilizational link. They recognized that. They did not grant that. By the way, I also wrote an article recently trying to explain why some in the weaponized narrative against Israel use the 1947 partition plan as the birthing of Israel, because they want to say the UN granted you a small country, and the UN was maybe wrong to do that, but you should never be bigger than the borders of the UN. And I pointed out in that article that the real international legal recognition of Jewish rights in the land of Israel was all the way back in San Remo and at Balfour, which recognized Jewish rights in the land of Israel and wanted to reconstitute, this was the language, reconstitute the Jewish Commonwealth in the land of Israel. You also go to lengths in your article to actually point out that throughout Jewish history, Jews really never gave up their civilizational connection with this land.
Absolutely. So that was my point earlier, that if conventional civilizations or nations had to go through what Jews have had to go through, remember I mentioned those 2 stages where stage 1, you're in your land, but you're ruled by someone else. And then you're out of your land and you're ruled by someone else. And the land is also ruled by someone else, right? Right. With all of this happening, this hasn't actually happened with conventional civilizations. I mean, the subcontinent, for example, has always had a comfortable Hindu majority, even though Muslims have also lived in the subcontinent, but it's also always had a comfortable Hindu majority. Buddhism started out in northern India, Nepal, that area, Lumbini, but it's spread into Far Eastern Asia. There's generally been where Buddhist communities have existed, there has been a Buddhist demographic majority. Same with Islam and its advent in the Hijaz region in what is today called Saudi Arabia, in the Mecca-Medina area. Muslims have always generally had a Muslim majority in the lands over which they ruled, generally speaking, although there are some exceptions. But with Jews, they lost that majority. They lost the demographic majority after the expulsion. The area becomes Byzantine Christian over time, and then it comes under the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Crusades happen. So basically, you've got Muslims and Christians fighting over this territory. But Jews, where are the Jews in the picture? They're sort of like a subdued minority in the background at times. In fact, for the most part in history, they did find more of an ally with Muslims than they did with the Christians. But there's been a bit of a reversal on that score, which probably is too complex for us to go into now. But I think
it's not that complex in the sense that the Islam was able to deal with the Jew as a second-class citizen when the Jew was weak, and indeed a second-class citizen. The minute you have a shiny country in the midst of an Islamic region in an area that they thought that was under their dominion and is now has this competing religion, competing people who were supposed to remain a second-class citizen, now being these upstarts in their region, showing them off, kind of showing them up, that is something that is that hurts their sense of pride and their sense of religion. So that's the only difference between, let's say, Islam and Catholicism, is that Catholicism figured out that they're not equipped anymore to defeat the entity called Israel. So they came to some kind of separate peace, some kind of, detente, while Islam, or at least parts of Islam, have not yet been able to do that. Although there is some budding effort towards that, it seems. There's some budding effort. It's obvious. It's oftentimes quashed. In this article, by the way, that Sayid Golani wrote, he was trying to quash the Saudi rapprochement with Israel. But that is, there is, I think, and maybe I'll get a chance to talk with you about this at a different interview, there is an interest today in some parts of Islam to find a way past the conflict and to somehow religiously accept Israel. But that is not the case with the Palestinian leadership, for sure.
Yeah, look, I've often made the point in the past, not in that specific article that we're talking about tonight, but in other articles, I have made the point that most civilizations' histories tends to be, most histories tend to be bipolar. Now, people, because your history shapes your confidence in yourself, people have the habit of cherry picking the good bits and willfully disowning the bad bits. Now, it's very difficult to ascertain whether someone's history has more good bits than bad bits or not, because it all really depends on the vantage point of the observer. So suffice it to say that the history of Islamic civilization is no different. Now, often what ends up happening is, if a Muslim person's talking about their history, they'll pick out the best bits where they'll say, oh, look, here's a reference to a particular time frame where Jews were booming and thriving under Islamic rule. And they'll often refer to the Andalusian period for that, right? But then whilst that may be true, there may be truth to that, but at the same time, there was also more radical and more extremist caliphs who didn't treat Jews very well. And the same is true of Christianity. There were popes who were friendly towards Jews and popes who were not. So the accurate way of looking at things is to look at the whole picture, warts and all, and then draw conclusions based on that. And when we look at that, and we look at the broad sweep of the second stage of Galut, right, from the 135 CE onwards, we find that Jews were treated as subordinates both in the Christian lands in Europe as well as in Islamic lands across North Africa and the Middle East. And it is true that at times, because Islam has more of a formalized institution called dhimmi, where the subordinate class has to know its place, they can be they have been quite tolerant in the past. But as you rightfully say, Israel is big, it's powerful, it's a first world country right in the heart of the Middle East. It exists in its own right, and that will be found bothersome by lots of Israel's neighbors. But the good news is that I think there's been a bit of a reversal happening because of the threat of Iran. So the Gulf states are beginning to come on side. And I think some of Israel's immediate neighbors in the north, Syria and Lebanon, who share a border with it, it's a matter of time before they also come to the party and basically want to make peace.
Right. The word peace is a tricky word. It is a modern and popular word. I think a lot of times I prefer the word cooperation or regional alignment or realignment. The word peace has in it a kind of an unspoken love, which I think maybe is not going to exist so very quickly, but an acceptance and understanding that this is a border with a neighbor who's powerful, that I respect and that I have to accept in one way or another and work with, is probably more likely in the shorter long term than in the long term of actually coming to some kind of big sense of Middle East peace. We're not quite there yet. We got to remember that anti-Semitism is still taught very much in Egypt, in Jordan. We see the television programming that comes out of those places. So even places with formalized so-called peace with Israel still are teaching tremendous lot of anti-Semitism. Dr. Sherry, let me kind of reintroduce you for a second and also mention some of the people that are with us right now. We are speaking with Dr. Sherry Sufi from Western Australia, who's an intellectual, a writer, and a thinker about linguistics and about nationalism. And he also brings people of influence and the policymakers to places like Israel, amongst other places around the world, to understand what the regions are doing and thinking. And he's written a fabulous article that we're talking about today in the Times of Israel, which I really recommend. And folks, if you know me, you know I'm not one to recommend things lightly. If I'm recommending it to you, it's because I truly believe in it. It's an article in the Times of Israel called Israel, Not a European Colony. I recommend it to you not just for the content, but also for the style. There's a certain stylistic element in it, which is important to read. In the meantime, before you get to that reading, I just want to say hi to a few people who are with us. Lee Rosen is with us. Josh Wonder, my good friend. Liev Hove. We have a friend from Cyprus, whose name I cannot read because I don't read the Cyrillic Greek alphabet, but I want to tell you that I am really looking forward to getting to Cyprus, and maybe even this summer. I'm very interested in the Cypriot Greek-Israel kind of alliance, and I want to check out the beaches too. Is that a sin? And also Moshe Yehuda Bernstein. A lot of people are with us, and we're both live on Facebook and on YouTube, and this will also be part of the Yishai Fleisher Show, my podcast, which people can tune into by visiting my website, which is yishaifleisher.com, or the Land of Israel Network, which I'm part of. I'm proud to be part of that. So I just put up the website name on the screen. And I want to turn for a second to people who are watching, and I want to encourage you to comment a little bit. And the question that I want to get to is that we've dealt with theoretics. And my sister, Racheli Vinnick, just popped on as well. Hi, Racheli. God bless you. Sherry, Dr. Sherry, we've talked about it in a bit of a theoretical kind of framework. This stuff is not theoretical at all. The article that you wrote is also itself part of a war, part of this narrative war. And I engage a lot on Twitter, and I go to sleep at night. On the one hand, happy with my own personal work. On the other hand, realizing how many people out there are against Israel, and how the various narratives, the anti-Israel narratives, are powerful in the age of narratives, in the age of social media, which we're engaging in right now. In the age of social media, anti-Israel narratives are everywhere, and they're powerful. And there's different kinds. One is Israel steals America's money, and they have lawyers and interest groups getting American money, and therefore you're existing on our dime and our dollar. Or, of course, the one that we're really focused on, which is you're a white Israel, you're a white European colonialist enterprise. You were born in a British Jewish cabal, and now you are taking over Palestine, and you have no other history. I myself, by the way, met an Arab in Jerusalem who told me we have dug up this land, and we have found no Jewish history for the last 10,000 years. That's what he told me back then.
He hasn't beaten up the Mount of Olives.
He denies everything. He denies everything. So I'm throwing out there. The question. I want to turn the conversation more into the real world, campus, New York Times. There was, by the way, an article in New York Times this week that basically said, here's a laboratory that Israel uses to kill people, to study ways to kill people, and now they're using it for healing the COVID virus. But the point is that there was a narrative in there. Israel's a violent state. So there are many narratives out there, and I want to turn it to you. Just before I do, my friend Shlomo Alguera is writing. He says, I think as Jews become more secularized, they tend to fall into left-wing movements to fill the void of their lack of identity. And that brings us back to the question, Dr. Sherry. Tell me about how we're facing these narratives that you're writing against on campus, in places like that, and how do we push back?
Yep. So before I can even answer how we push back, there is something else that is absolutely crucial for us to acknowledge. Why do people care about this tiny sliver of land in the first place? I mean, if we were to compare the size of Israel, it would be almost the same as New Jersey, or Qatar, or I'm pretty sure it's even smaller than Sri Lanka. You don't really see people investing huge amounts of effort and energy discussing those other tiny places. So why this? I think the answer is because of its civilizational relevance in the eyes of Westerners and I guess, Muslims. There is some kind of a religious civilizational connection there with Jerusalem, and it's part of people's eschatologies. And so they feel a sense of ownership because that land means something to them. And I think that's what sort of brings this particular conflict and this whole debate onto a gigantic scale, probably where it doesn't belong, but it ends up belonging there because of the reason I just mentioned. So that's the first thing. Now, how do we fight it?
Wait, 1 second. I want to hang on to that point of yours. So your point was that people feel their own personal civilizational connection to it. You said Islam, Christianity, and yet there's maybe another level, which is a type of replacement theology in a modern sense, which is I call the replacement theology of 2020 is replacement narrative. For some reason, people feel a great need to replace Israel, to be the new Israel. That's actually Christian language. Or in the Islamic version is that Judaism was din al-batel, which is like a religion, a discarded old religion. There's some kind of great need to replace the Jews. That's also part of replacement narrative today, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it is, but it depends on which circles we're talking about. We've got to be cautious, I guess, when we talk about the anti-Zionist, anti-Israel forces, because all they may be united by is their shared goal to dismantle the Jewish state, but the methodology and the motivations may be slightly different. So, the religious fundamentalists might well be of the description that you mentioned a second ago, but then there are atheists who have the same goals. You know, it makes you wonder on a deeper psychological level, what is going through the head of a Westerner who lives in New York, isn't Jewish, isn't Muslim, isn't Christian, has no personal connection with that land or anything to do with it. But you look at some of these people that have, for example, that comment on your Facebook page, and especially ones on mine, because I actually don't delete a lot of the hate that I receive. I leave it there in the name of free speech, unless, of course, they're inciting to violence, which they sometimes do. You look at some of the stuff they're saying, and you click on the profile of the person that's writing all that stuff. They're not actually normal people. It's not just a cultivated interest. It's like the cover page is something to do with Free Palestine. The profile pic is something to do with Free Palestine. They'll have a picture of the Dome of the Rock and all of that. And I'm like, this person's neither Arab nor are they Jewish. They don't speak Hebrew. They don't speak Arabic. They haven't lived in that part of the world. And they're also not an academic, right? You could have you're allowed to have an academic interest in a subject without a personal connection, right? And they're not even an academic. I can't find a single paper published by them. So it's like, why do you even care?
Right.
That really fascinates me. And I think to answer my own question, I mean, why do I think they care? Is because they've been caught up in these gigantic conspiracy theories that are invented by people who do care, who do have a personal connection. Right? As you mentioned before, the Jews wanting to control the world and this and that, and you have to. Or for that matter, the religious fundamentalist who wants to replace the Jew, sometimes they'll subscribe to a conspiracy theory and they'll broadcast it, and 10,000 people might reach it. Not every single one of those 10,000 people are as religious as the guy broadcasting it, but then they end up subscribing to the idea. And that's how it has this multiplier effect, which we have to constantly push back against.
I'll let it go. I'll let this go, Dr. Sherry. But to me, these are you kind of gave me the symptoms, or let's put it this way, like another element of the pathology, but the root of the pathology is still not exactly clear. The root of anti-Semitism, the root of replacement theology. There might be something, and myself being a religious man and a rabbi, maybe to me there is also some kind of there must be a bigger answer to the obsessiveness by which the world loves or hates Israel, and has something to do with the Bible. It has something to do with, it probably has something to do with a sense of where the world needs to go and what the what the end game of the universe is altogether.
Yeah.
And like there's something there, and I remember, I think I was reading a book called Slaughterhouse 5 by Vonnegut. Was that the name, guys? Is that the right name? In any case, he writes somewhere there, he says, He says the Middle East is like the birth canal of the world. It's bloody, it's torn, and from there will come some kind of salvation for the world. So anyway, like that.
But now that you've mentioned it, I mean, we're live on air. We might as well just touch on that very briefly, because this is the bit that I suppose, hinted at in the article without exactly specifically going into the details. But I mean, perhaps, and this perhaps gives us something to talk about in the future podcast, but I'll leave you on this thought. Both of the two religions that have fought over the Jewish homeland for the last sort of, the better half of the last 1,500 years, these religions did not come out of a Hindu context or a Confucius context or an Aboriginal Dreamtime context. They came out of a Jewish context. All of the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Sarah, and Moses and Aaron, all of that, these are Jewish stories. And they have been obviously, inherited, if you will, if that's the way to put it, by both the two religions that are its offshoots, Christianity and Islam. So you're not wrong in thinking that the temptation that these religions have substituted the earlier of the two is always there. Now, in fairness, we must acknowledge that whilst Christian history has been incredibly anti-Jewish, the Christian world has today created pockets of support for the state of Israel. The motivations may not be exactly identical to your motivations or my motivations, and they may have something to do with, eschatological underpinnings, which we can talk about another time, but they're there nonetheless, and Israel can continue to benefit from that, because their motivations may be different, but they're at least not out there to actively hurt you.
Right.
They're there to support your right to be there, to have sovereignty over the land, to constitute your demographic majority, and so forth. However, the mantle has shifted now to the Arab world, and there we're sort of dealing with some quite vile conspiracy theories, which we probably don't have the time to get into, but it's this collision of, European anti-Semitism that came out of Russia, like this whole idea, the protocols of the elders of Zion, which would probably require a podcast of its own if we were to start unpacking it. It's that has gone and superimposed itself on top of a supersessionist Islamic mindset, which has created the modern Muslim anti-Zionist kind of way of thinking. It's an enmeshment of both. Yeah,
a lot. That's right, and that's a good point. Let me just read a few of the comments that have come up. My friend Lou Weiss says, because Israel is the root of all civilizations, the root of the three major religions, as you were saying, that there's some kind of common root between them, and that causes some of the tensions. Lara from Denver says, things seem to have turned from disagreement over political, emotional, possibly even well-intentioned support for the little guy, the oppressed, as Palestinians are perceived by some, but that has meshed with the Jew hatred perfectly, meaning to say, some of the liberal thinking has the idea that I read this from Professor Joshua Berman, to the victims go the spoils, right? Meaning to say the victim mentality. And she says that goes well to get meshed together with Jew hatred and with Palestinians as the victims. That's absolutely true. Lavin throws out a compliment, says Sherry Sufi, PhD, is well articulated. Very good. And Michael Chasson, good friend of mine, says, at what point will the G word come into political discourse? And he means, of course, God. And I think that if you look in the Muslim world, the God is a very, very prevalent part of the discourse. And I think I've noticed that Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying. It's not easy for him. He's trying. It's easier in America to say, in God we trust. But I think I hear a lot more Baruch Hashem's, like thank God's from Prime Minister Netanyahu. But there's no question. We are dealing with some of the phenomenons that are, this is not this particular discussion. I have many religious discussions, for example, with Rabbi Mike Feuer. This particular discussion is more sociological, sure, and trying to get to the root of how people are thinking and why in some ways this discussion is even okay, let's put God aside for a second and see why people are being anti-Semitic or pro-Israel, by the way. And Joy Halen says, Shalom from Australia. Listen to you on my morning walks all the time. Thank you very much, Joy. Sherry, Dr. Sherry Sufi, again, you're a West Australian writer and thinker. I just want to get you one more time back on track to something that I may have thrown you off, and I need you to try to help me answer this, which is, let's talk about today, campus today, the weaponization of the weaponized narrative. Like how is it being actually used against Israel daily, and what can we do to fight it?
What is actually happening is that there is this narrative floating around that Jews are just white European colonizers, and in the process of trying to get into Palestine and colonize it, they've ended up displacing large numbers of people, right? And the settlement building project and so on and so forth is only more of the same. It's the same thing. This is what they're saying, that what is happening today in what to you is Judea, Samaria, and to them the West Bank is the same as what happened on the other side of the Green Line between sort of 1882 up to 1948. And so they're saying this is all colonization, and because it's colonization, it's a terrible thing. And colonization in this day and age, it has it's a pejorative. But it shouldn't be, because the positive came out of European colonization, but it's a separate debate. But in the eyes of the world, colonization was a bad thing, particularly European colonization. So then when they go and share that narrative with large numbers of people, they've won them over. They've won them over, right? Which is why the way that, and you asked me twice, how do we push back? Well, we push back by pointing out that the Jews are not, in fact, foreign colonizers. Their culture, values, language, their ancestors all originated in that specific territory. And they were removed from there against their will. Now they're back in their land, reconstituting themselves. You can maybe find other ways to oppose it or whatever it is, but you can't then to turn around and say that these people are not actually even from here. Right? You're rewriting history.
Well, so know your history, be able to feel it inside, be able to articulate it. But then you've used another term somewhere in your article, which is, and let me put up that article right now. So I just want people to be able to see it. On the Times of Israel, it's a must read. It's called Israel, Not a European Colony. It's actually the Jewish people coming back to the land of Israel is actually decolonialization. That's a very, to me personally, that is a very powerful language. Meaning to say the Jewish people back in the land are actually decolonializing the land by pushing out, in this case, the British, or pushing out even Islamic control of this land, which is an ancient Jewish land. You know what? I'll let you say. You tell me how you understand that phrase that you wrote, which is there's a element of decolonialization instead of colonialization. It's kind of more robust, and just not say, no, we're not colonizers, but to use that term decolonialization. Help me use that term properly.
Yeah, so there's a few activists that have begun using the term decolonization. In fact, my very good friend, the head of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Rifkin, uses that term in his recently released book, Zionism. He sort of calls it the Jewish National Liberation Movement, right? That's the light in which Zionism has to be marketed and sold to the world. Otherwise, you're forever going to be struggling with, your neighbors as well as their sympathizers in the West, trying to push back. If you're a colonizer, then they're going to say you shouldn't be there. If you're European, you shouldn't be there. But if you can then challenge that and say, we're neither Europeans nor colonizers, it's our land. The only thing is, we lost sovereignty over it and we lost our majority over it. So the debate we really need to be having is, do you believe, this is what we should be asking the critics of Israel is, do you believe that someone, the indigenous people of a land that gets shrunk from a majority to a minority state, do they have the right to reconstitute their demographic majority through repopulating the land and reconstituting a state over it? And a state that's not even half of what the critics say it is. I mean, I've driven around extensively in the Arab villages in northern Israel. The ones that live on the other side of the Green Line, they do not want to be part of a future Palestinian state. The state of Israel has a manageable minority, 1/5 Arabs, who have more rights there than in many neighboring countries. So that's the narrative that's got to get out there. That's the narrative that needs to resonate. And it's not, but it is decolonization in the sense that the indigenous people managed to reconstitute themselves. Now, to quickly use a comparable, see, it's very hard to think of another example of where this has happened because it hasn't. But I could give you a hypothetical example. You know, the Zoroastrian peoples who originally came from Iran. Iran wasn't always Islamic nor Shiite, nor did they always speak Farsi. They spoke a language called Avestan, and they had the religion called Zoroastrianism. When Islam conquered that land in the 7th century, over time the Zoroastrians were pushed eastbound, and they ended up in areas of the northern part of the subcontinent. And mostly live in actually most of them are based in the province of Gujarat. Now imagine if the Zoroastrians of India were to start their own equivalent of the Zionist movement, and they wanted to go back and reconstitute a Western-speaking Zoroastrian civilizational majority in Iran, of course we can acknowledge that the current Iranians are not going to like that, right? They're not going to like that because they're going to say, yeah, okay, well, you may have been here chronologically, historically, but we're the ones that have lived on it for the last 1,400 years, right? So we also have a valid land. And that's almost the prism through which we can look at the modern Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But this is a hypothetical. Now, I can't come up with any other examples of a similar decolonization movement of a people that get removed from their geography, then go back and reconstitute their majority and regain sovereignty over it. And only the Jews have been able to do something like that.
Right.
Helps us understand why some people understand it so poorly, because it is so miraculously unique. Very good.
Very good. Dr. Sherry Sufi, just a few more minutes let's read a few comments from the folks. Says, let me see here. Let me see. Says Lee Rosen, those Jews who have returned to Israel should be called revenants or returnees. I call them resettlers, right? I think the word revenant is while it was a title of a movie, I think people don't know what that really means. So I use the term resettlers. And sometimes when people call me a settler, I say, yeah, but I'm a resettler. And that's a good terminology. Speaking of terminology, because we are also talking about knowledge, but we're also talking about terminology, Dr. Sufi. So says Lara, liberation movement, I will use that. National Liberation Movement. And I'm glad that Lara says that, because that means that this discussion has also yielded a tactical, if not just strategic understanding. Yeah, liberation movement, national liberation movement. That's what Zionism is. Indigenous is best, says Louise. And she likes that. Also, Lee Rosen says, revenants are not colonizers, not occupiers. I think this is the last one here. Israel haters don't know, nor are they willing to accept historical facts. The San Remo resolution gave Israel, I don't want to use the word gave, also it's really recognized Israeli Jewish rights, legal rights on the land of Israel according to international law, which stands till today. And it was still and really is the deal of the century. That was my article recently, which I wrote, San Remo, the original deal of the century. Also, Israel should not be saying they are annexing Judea and Samaria, but rather reclaiming sovereignty, as the doctor is saying. Dr. Sherry Sufi, your article, which I want everybody to see, here I'm putting it up on the screen, is called Israel, Not a European Colony, is both important historically and also linguistically. You've really added a lot to this discussion. And I think that everybody who's out there on campus or is facing these challenges in various ways at the workplace or on Twitter or wherever they are, need to read this article. I highly recommend it. And I want to thank you very much for really helping us understand, even us Jews, understand our history a little bit better and our relevance or revenance, should we say, in this land. And let's hope for the betterment of this whole region, that the wars against Israel will stop, but also the narrative war. And I think maybe it's important to end here, which is if the narrative war against Israel can be stopped or won, then that will not only make Israel live a happier, healthier life, but it'll also help the region develop, because a lot of these fights actually depress the progress of the whole region, including the Arab countries around us that need to, how should we say, get over this 100-year war, move into a mode of acceptance of Israel, and therefore a mode of prosperity, and dare I say even a deeper relationship between the children of Abraham in this region for a better future.
Yeah, amen to that. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I guess my final thoughts would be that accepting that Jews are neither European nor foreign colonizers on Middle Eastern soil is not going to solve this conflict overnight. It just simply, we'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that that would be the case. But at the bare minimum, starting with that acknowledgement will most certainly shift the conversation towards a far, far better direction than the one it's been on for the last 100 years. And that's what I've attempted to make a small and meaningful contribution towards by reading that article. So if you want to follow more of the things that I write and say, feel free to chuck a like on my page. It's not in the links, but perhaps I'll put it in the comments, and let's keep collaborating.
Absolutely. Oh, I've put up your website many times, which is sherrysufi.com. Very easy to get to, and stay connected with Sherry and what he's thinking and what he's writing. And we hope to have you on again here on the show. So thank you very much for joining us through the magic of this technology, all the way from Western Australia with a big time difference. By the way, I recently was in Perth, so I have a sense of Western Australia. It's really an honor and a pleasure. There's a lot of great Australians that are part of the story, and it's just an honor to be able to connect it with you, and also so cool through this awesome technology. Dr. Sherry Sufi, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good to be with you.
All right, folks, you are here with me, Yishai Fleisher, on my Facebook page and on YouTube. Join me on my website for all the stuff that I do, which is hopefully to honor God, to help build Israel, and to help the story of a better world come forward. My website is yishaifleisher.com. And if you want me to keep broadcasting, so help me out, be part of that. And we're really trying to broadcast God's word, the land of Israel's word. And remember that very amazing phrase, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, from Zion shall come out Torah. Torah is really knowledge. So check out yishaifleisher.com/donate. Easy enough. Again, I remind you, check out Sherry Sufi's website. It was great to have him as a guest, sherrysufi.com. And more great stuff is on the way on this and these channels. Oh yeah, and connect with me anywhere you like, at Yishai Fleisher, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube is a little bit of a different name. I think it's called Ion Zion, we called it. It was a great name some years ago, and I still like it now. So Ion Zion, that's more YouTube-y. And of course at the Land of Israel Network as well. Yeah, don't be shy. Help donate. We live in a world where it makes a big difference if you help out with even a cup of coffee, right? If you would see me in the street, you would buy me a cup of coffee, maybe. So if you would, then chuck a little bit of cash our way, because we're going to keep on broadcasting. And remember, it's not really me, and it's not really us. It's really a greater message. We're part of a great time. We're living in a great era of the reconstitution of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. That means a better world is coming. Great things are coming. Great knowledge is coming to this world, and we're just here to share it and to thank God for every single moment. God bless you wherever you are, and stay tuned, and shalom. All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleisher Show. That's been a long and awesome show. We had Rabbi Mike Feuer, and just now finished up with Dr. Sherry Sufi. I want to thank so many people who make this show possible. First, I have fabulous donors. I don't want to mention them all by name right now. You guys make all the difference in the world. I mean you. You make all the difference. And I want to thank you so much for helping make the show possible. And anybody else who wants to join in and help make the show, help broadcast to the world Torah and truth from Judea, please do so by going to yishaifleisher.com/donate. And that makes a big difference. And also support all of our other friends as well. For example, the Land of Israel Network, which the show is hosted on, and also Hebron Fund, the Hebron Jewish Community. Hebronfund.org is really a way to strengthen that Jewish community, that part of Judea, and to strengthen the mothers and the fathers and their eternal resting place. I also want to thank Ben Bresky and Tabitha and Moshe Herman for getting the show out to the world. You guys are beautiful. You guys are awesome. And I want to thank you guys out there, wherever you are. Keep on being strong. Put on some tchelet, true blue Jews, stringlets, dyed in the tchelet Jews. That's what we are. So check out TEKHELET.com. And I just really want to bless you wherever you are, to keep being strong, to keep connected, to keep wanting to learn more, to keep praying to God for health through this crisis, to remember the loved ones that have been lost, to remember to mark the special days that have been missed throughout this process, and to really have a lot of faith in yourself that if you're alive in this time, that means that God wants you around. And just to send you a lot of love, really, from the land of love, from the land of blessings. And write me an email, Yishai@thelandofisrael.com or Yishai@YishaiFleisher.com. And be strong.